America is drowning in debt, over $35 trillion, and it's rising by nearly $1 trillion every 100 days. For every taxpayer, that's more than $15,000 owed. While Washington prints money and Wall Street profits, millions of Americans live one paycheck away from disaster. Some states are already showing cracks: bankrupt hospitals, failing schools, collapsing pensions, shrinking populations. When the next recession hits, some won't just struggle, they could implode. Here's a deep dive into the 10 U.S. states most vulnerable when America's economic house of cards finally collapses. West Virginia is a warning of long-term economic collapse. Once the heart of coal country, the state has seen its main industry shrink by over 75% since 2010, wiping out tens of thousands of high-paying jobs. Now, West Virginia relies on low-wage service work and federal aid. Nearly 20% live below the poverty line, and the median household income is $55,000, which is $15,000 below the U.S. average. Only 54% of working-age adults are employed or actively seeking work. The opioid epidemic worsens the crisis, with some counties recording 84 deaths per 100,000 residents. Population decline adds pressure. Over 100,000 residents have left since 2010, mostly young people moving to North Carolina, Ohio, or Texas. Infrastructure is crumbling, 1 in 5 bridges is structurally deficient, and federal transfers make up over 35% of the state budget. West Virginia isn't preparing for collapse, it's already living it. Mississippi consistently ranks near the bottom for economic indicators. Median household income is $48,000, almost $22,000 below the national median. Poverty affects nearly 20% of residents, and in some rural counties it exceeds 35%. Workforce participation is only 56%, reflecting widespread despair. Education ranks 50th nationally, with underfunded schools and limited higher education options. Healthcare struggles: highest infant mortality in the U.S., low life expectancy, and 14% uninsured. Infrastructure is fragile. 25% of bridges are deficient, with multi-billion-dollar repair backlogs. Heavy reliance on federal aid, over 40% of expenditures, leaves Mississippi extremely vulnerable to downturns. Michigan's recovery is fragile despite headlines. Auto manufacturing drives 20% of GDP, but global supply shocks could destabilize the state. Over 40% of residents face financial stress from overdue bills, medical debt, or defaulted loans. Median income is $63,000, but poverty remains high, especially in Detroit neighborhoods above 30%. Population decline continues. More than 100,000 residents left between 2020 and 2024, leaving aging, low-income communities. 21% of Detroit housing is vacant, and 45% of roads are in poor condition. Rural hospitals continue closing, and the opioid epidemic worsens the situation. Michigan's economy is delicate. A single downturn in auto sales could trigger foreclosures and massive unemployment. Alabama, has a lot of cultural pride and some stunning natural beauty, but its economic foundation is, pretty weak. The median household income sits at about $59,000, and about 16% of people live in poverty. Education is a major weakness here. Alabama is consistently ranked in the bottom 5 nationally, with underfunded schools and a real shortage of teachers. Only about 27% of adults have a bachelor's degree or higher. Healthcare is honestly on shaky ground. 300,000 people are uninsured. 15 rural hospitals have closed since 2010. Infant mortality is high and life expectancy is below average. Infrastructure, that's struggling too. 16% of bridges are considered deficient. Rural broadband is really limited, and the state's rainy day fund is pretty thin. Alabama's heavy dependence on aerospace, automotive, and agriculture means it's vulnerable to trade shocks. If a recession hits, schools could close, hospitals might have to turn patients away, and entire communities could end up stranded. Arkansas has a median income of about $53,000 and roughly 15% of its residents live in poverty. Rural areas in particular face some severe economic challenges. Healthcare access is poor, with over 200,000 people uninsured and 10 rural hospitals closed since 2010. Education remains a weak spot, with less than a quarter of adults holding bachelor's degrees. Rural schools that are outdated and persistent teacher shortages. Walmart is the dominant employer, but automation is threatening a lot of those jobs. Agriculture and manufacturing are also unstable, mostly because of global competition. Infrastructure has really been neglected. 40% of rural residents lack broadband, and roads and bridges need billions in repairs. Federal transfers actually cover 45% of state revenue, which leaves Arkansas pretty dependent on Washington. The state's crisis is slow and quiet, but honestly, a recession would really reveal just how fragile things are. Kentucky is struggling in the aftermath of coal's decline. Since 2010, about 60% of coal jobs have disappeared, leaving Appalachian counties stuck in generational poverty. The median income is $57,000, with 17% of people living in poverty, and in some rural areas, it's over 25%. Workforce participation is just 58%, and only about 27% of adults have a bachelor's degree. Rural hospitals keep closing, and the opioid epidemic is devastating, claiming more than 2,100 lives every year. Infrastructure gaps are still a big issue. 1 in 10 bridges is considered deficient, and rural broadband is well patchy at best. Kentucky risks seeing entire regions abandoned during the next recession. So, Nevada relies pretty heavily on tourism and gaming, which actually employs about 30% of the workforce. Unemployment rates swing from 3.6% to 4.2%, but, it spiked all the way to 13% during the 2008 crash. Housing prices have shot up 40% since 2020, with the median home now costing over $450,000, while the median income sits at $72,000. In rural counties, populations are shrinking and services are pretty fragile. Infrastructure is definitely strained. 20% of bridges are considered deficient. Water scarcity is a real concern with the Colorado River, and since there's no state income tax, the budget really depends on tourism revenue. All in all, Nevada's economy is just super vulnerable to collapse during economic shocks. Louisiana faces a tough battle with poverty, affecting 19% of its residents. The median income here is $56,000, and the state's reliance on oil and gas creates a boom-bust cycle that's hard to break. Hurricanes, like the devastating Hurricane Ida in 2021, have caused repeated destruction, with damages reaching $75 billion. The infrastructure is crumbling, receiving a D+ rating with over 1,500 deficient bridges, roads, levees, and water systems that are underfunded. There's a severe brain drain as 70% of LSU graduates leave within 5 years. The population is stagnant or even declining, and access to healthcare is limited. Louisiana faces a perfect storm of poverty, weak infrastructure, and recurring disasters, putting it on a path toward collapse. Hawaii's cost of living is, extreme. The median home price is a whopping $850,000, while the median income is $88,000. Essentials cost nearly double what they do on the mainland. Tourism drives 30% of the GDP, leaving the economy quite fragile. The drop in visitors during the pandemic really exposed this vulnerability. Long-term residents are leaving, replaced by wealthy investors and transient populations. Healthcare shortages, high energy costs, and import dependence increase the state's vulnerability. Hawaii may be paradise for the wealthy, but it's a financial trap for locals, making it highly exposed in the next recession. Illinois hides one of America's most dangerous crises, with pensions underfunded by a staggering $139 billion, which is nearly $11,000 per resident. The credit ratings are near junk, borrowing costs are high, and services are underfunded. Property taxes are among the nation's highest, at 2.2% annually for some homeowners, driving residents away. In 2024 alone, Illinois lost 83,000 residents, mostly higher earners. The economy is uneven. Chicago thrives with finance and tech, but much of the rest of Illinois struggles with declining manufacturing, shrinking small towns, and underfunded schools.